Case 1. Casey Parsons. August 2, 2019. Rowan County, North Carolina. There are some stories that begin quietly. No sirens in the beginning. No flashing lights. No immediate alarm that something has gone terribly wrong. There are some stories where the tragedy lives entirely in the silence. In the years that passed, in the questions no one asked, in a little girl who simply stopped being seen and no one, for far too long, raised their voice to ask why. This is one of those stories. Her name was Erica Lynn Parsons. She was born on February 24, 1998, in Concord, North Carolina. From the very first years of her life, Erica faced challenges that most children never encounter. She was born with hearing loss. She likely had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, a condition that affects development, learning, and communication. She was, by every account of people who knew her in her earliest years, a child who needed extra patience, extra care, and extra love. In the year 2000, when Erica was just 2 years old, she was adopted by Sandy and Casey Parsons, a couple living in a rural area outside of Salisbury, North Carolina. To the outside world, the Parsons family looked like any other. They had multiple children in the home. They attended church. They lived in a modest house in a quiet part of Rowan County. There was nothing, at first glance, that would have made a neighbor stop and wonder. But behind closed doors, the life that Erica Parsons was living was something no child should ever experience. Witnesses who later testified described a household where Erica was treated differently from the other children. She was singled out. She was separated. She was subjected to conditions and treatment that investigators would later describe as prolonged, deliberate abuse over the course of years. And while the other children in that home grew, went to school, and had something resembling a childhood, Erica was slowly disappearing from the world. Casey Parsons had pulled Erica from public school and registered the home as a Christian homeschool. On the surface, this seemed like a parenting choice. In reality, it was something far more calculated. You see, as long as Erica remained hidden inside that home, away from teachers, away from school counselors, away from any adult outside the family who might notice the bruises, the weight loss, the signs of what was happening to her, there was no one to ask questions. There was no one to intervene. North Carolina's homeschool laws at the time were minimal in their oversight requirements. Once Erica was removed from the public school system, she was essentially removed from public view entirely. And Casey Parsons knew that. According to the Charlotte Observer's extensive coverage of this case and testimony from fraud proceedings that came years later, Sandy and Casey Parsons were receiving federal adoption assistance money specifically allocated to help care for Erica's disabilities. They were also receiving state money related to her adopted status. That money continued flowing into their household even after Erica was no longer seen by a single person outside that home. The couple collected more than $12,000 in government benefits meant for a child they would later be revealed to have harmed. The judge who would eventually sentence Casey Parsons on her federal fraud conviction said something that has stayed with investigators, journalists, and advocates who followed this case for years. He looked at Casey Parsons and said, "I cannot fathom the hatred you had in your heart for that little girl. In my view, you are morally bankrupt." Those words did not come from the murder case. Those words came from the fraud case, the first time justice caught up with Casey Parsons. And they came years before the full truth of what happened to Erica would be told. The disappearance of Erica Parsons became publicly known on July 30th, 2013. That was the day her adoptive brother, Jamie, went to Rowan County detectives and told them he had not seen Erica alive since November of 2011. Let that sink in for a moment. Erica had not been seen by her own brother since November 2011. She was not reported missing until July 2013. Nearly 2 full years passed before anyone sounded the alarm. Erica would have been 13 years old when she was last seen. She never made it to 14. When authorities began investigating, Casey and Sandy Parsons told them a story. They said Erica had gone to live with her biological paternal grandmother, a woman they called Nan Goodman, in Asheville, North Carolina. They described this woman in detail. They gave investigators enough of a story to seem plausible. The only problem was that investigators searched extensively and could find no evidence that Nan Goodman existed. No address. No records. No trail. The woman the Parsons family pointed to as Erica's caretaker simply could not be found because, According to investigators, she did not exist. It was a lie. And it was a lie that had bought Casey and Sandy Parsons nearly 2 years of silence. During the fraud investigation and trial, witnesses came forward with accounts of what life had been like for Erica inside that home. The picture that emerged was one of a child who was denied the basic rights that every child deserves: food, safety, dignity, freedom from harm. Family members described patterns of treatment directed at Erica that were not directed at the other children. And throughout all of it, Casey Parsons was described as the dominant force in the household, the one who set the tone, who made the decisions, who determined what happened to that little girl behind closed doors. In August of 2016, while Sandy Parsons was serving his federal prison sentence, something remarkable happened. He asked to speak to investigators. He told them he wanted to come clean. He admitted that Erica had not gone to live with any relative. He admitted that she had not simply run away or moved on. He admitted that Erica had died in December of 2011, and that he knew where her remains were. He told investigators that her body had been left in a wooded area near property owned by his family in Pageland, South Carolina, in Chesterfield County. Investigators obtained a court order to transport Sandy Parsons from federal prison to South Carolina. He was escorted by investigators along a long dirt road off Highway 9 in rural Chesterfield County to a family-owned farm and into a wooded area where he pointed to a location on the ground. On September 27, 2016, the remains of Erica Parsons were discovered. The lead investigator would later describe that day as one of the hardest of his career. Law enforcement personnel who had worked the case for years, who had driven those rural roads, who had knocked on those doors, who had sat with Erica's biological mother Carolyn as she waited for answers. Many of them were present that day. And by all accounts, tough men and women who had spent careers in law enforcement wept. Erica Parsons was finally laid to rest in February of 2017, the day after what would have been her 19th birthday. In January of 2018, an autopsy report was released. Medical examiners could not determine a specific cause of passing because of the condition of the remains after years in a shallow grave. But the manner of passing was officially ruled as homicidal violence of undetermined means. It was not an accident. It was not an illness. It was a ruling that placed the responsibility for Erica's fate exactly where investigators had believed it belonged from the beginning. On February 19, 2018, just days before what would have been Erica's 20th birthday, a grand jury in Rowan County returned indictments. Sandy Parsons and Casey Parsons were each charged with first-degree murder, felony child abuse, felony concealment of a passing, and felony obstruction of justice. The legal process moved carefully over the following year. Casey Parsons maintained for a long time that she would fight the charges. A trial date was set. And then, on August 2, 2019, Casey Parsons walked into Rowan County Superior Court and entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder. Under the terms of her plea agreement, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sandy Parsons also entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and was sentenced to a maximum of 43.5 years in prison. He remains incarcerated in a North Carolina state facility. Casey Parsons spent years in a federal prison in Florida on the fraud conviction before being transferred in November of 2023 to the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh, where she will spend the rest of her natural life. In the courtroom on the day Casey Parsons entered her plea, Carolyn Parsons, Erica's biological mother, addressed the court. She said she would never view family or trust the same way again. Those words, quiet and devastated, may be the most honest summary of what this case truly cost. Not just a young life, though that loss is irreplaceable, but the complete destruction of the trust that is supposed to exist between a child and the people chosen to protect her. Erica Lynn Parsons was 13 years old. She was hearing impaired, she was vulnerable, and she was completely dependent on the adults in her home to keep her safe. She loved lip gloss, according to family. She had a smile that lit up school photographs. She was, by every account, a child who deserved to grow up. The systems that were supposed to protect Erica, child welfare oversight, school attendance requirements, adoption monitoring, all failed her. Her story has since become a touchstone in North Carolina for advocates calling for stronger homeschool accountability laws and better oversight of children who are adopted and subsequently removed from public school settings. The Coalition for Responsible Home Education has cited Erica's case as one of the most powerful examples of how limited oversight creates conditions where vulnerable children can be hidden from the world. Erica's story did not end in that courtroom in 2019. Her story lives in every conversation about child protection, every policy reform discussion, every time an investigator looks at a child who has stopped being seen and decides to keep asking questions. Her story lives in the work of advocates who refuse to let the system look away. Justice, for Erica Parsons, was a long time coming, but it came, and the woman responsible for her suffering will never again have the ability to harm another child. If you are concerned about the welfare of a child in your community, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Calls are confidential and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every child deserves to be seen. Before we move to Case 2, if this documentary is opening your eyes to these stories, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts. Your support keeps these stories being told. Case 2. Rihanna Allen Watson. January 28, 2019. North Charlotte, North Carolina. The Brownstone neighborhood in North Charlotte is the kind of community where neighbors notice each other, where people wave from their driveways and recognize the families on their block. It is the kind of neighborhood where, when something goes wrong at 4 in the morning, the sound of emergency vehicles wakes people up, and they pull back their curtains and they stand at their windows and they wonder. On the morning of January 28, 2019, at 4:55 in the morning, officers with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department responded to a home on Galena View Drive in North Charlotte. The call was for a medical emergency. What they found when they arrived was a 7-month-old infant girl who was unresponsive. Her name was Jade Williams. The Charlotte Fire Department and medic personnel arrived almost simultaneously and immediately began life-saving efforts. Every resource available was used in those desperate early minutes to try to bring that tiny baby back. Jade Williams was rushed by medic to Atrium Health, where a team of medical professionals continued working to save her life. She was pronounced deceased shortly after arriving at the hospital. Jade was 7 months old. She had not yet learned to walk. She had not yet said her first real words. She had barely had the chance to exist in this world before her life was taken from her. The Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department's homicide unit responded to both the hospital and the residence on Galena View Drive. Investigators began the painstaking work of piecing together the events of that night. They spoke with witnesses. They examined the home. They interviewed family members who had been present. In the course of that investigation, Jade's mother, 20-year-old Rihanna Allen Watson, was transported to police headquarters for an interview with homicide detectives. What emerged from that interview, combined with the evidence collected at the hospital and the home, led investigators to one conclusion. Rihanna Allen Watson was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the passing of her infant daughter. Jail records confirmed Watson was taken into custody and transported to the Mecklenburg County Detention Center. A judge denied bond. She was not going home. Neighbors in the Brownstone community spoke to reporters in the hours and days that followed, and their words painted the picture of a community left shaken to its core. One neighbor, Michael Sims, told WCCB Charlotte simply, "A mother who loses a child like this, I don't even know the word for it." Another neighbor said they were completely shocked. Totally shocked, they said. Who would expect somebody to harm their own kids? This is the last place I thought something like this would happen. That sentiment, the shock, the disbelief, the unwillingness to reconcile what happened with the community they thought they knew, is one that echoes through virtually every case of this nature. Because the tragedy is not just what happened to Jade Williams. The tragedy is that Jade Williams was entirely dependent on one person for her survival. She was 7 months old. She could not protect herself. She could not call for help. She could not leave. She could only trust that the person responsible for her care would keep her safe. That trust was broken in the most permanent and devastating way possible. Charlotte Mecklenburg police did not release specific details about the cause of Jade's injuries in the immediate aftermath of the arrest. The investigation was described as ongoing. What they did confirm was that the information gathered during the interview with Watson, combined with the evidence collected from both the residence and the hospital, gave investigators sufficient grounds to charge her with first-degree murder, the most serious charge available under North Carolina law. At the time of Jade Williams' passing, her case was counted as the 12th homicide in Charlotte in the year 2019, double the number at the same point the previous year. That statistic sits in every news report about Jade's case like a quiet indictment not just of one individual, but of all the forces, poverty, stress, isolation, the absence of support systems, that so often surround these tragedies. First-degree murder in North Carolina carries the possibility of life in prison without parole, or in capital cases, the death penalty. What happened in Rihanna Watson's case in the years following her arrest was not fully reported in available public records at the time of this documentary's research. What is fully documented is the arrest, the charge, and the profound loss at the center of it all. Jade Williams deserved to grow up. She deserved to take her first steps, to say her first words, to go to school, to laugh, to run, to become whoever she was going to be. None of that will happen. All that remains is the record of her brief time in this world and the community that grieved her. The story of Jade Williams is a reminder that the most vulnerable members of our communities are the ones who depend on us most completely. And when that trust is violated by the very person placed in the highest position of responsibility, the role of a parent, the consequences are felt far beyond one home, one family, one neighborhood. For anyone who suspects a child in their community may be in danger, please do not hesitate to act. Call 911 in an emergency. Contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453 any time of day or night. Jade Williams' story matters. Her life mattered. And the accountability demanded in her name is a reflection of a community that refuses to forget. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment that keeps these victims in the conversation. Case 3. Daniela Villarreal. January 6, 2015. North Charlotte, North Carolina. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that arrives when a tragedy involves not one young life, but two. When the circumstances of a case force us to look at the full picture, the victim, yes, but also the perpetrator, and to ask uncomfortable questions about failure, about systems, about a world where a 16-year-old girl could become a mother without adequate support, without proper resources, without any meaningful safety net between her and the worst possible outcome. This case does not excuse what happened. Nothing excuses what happened. But understanding it requires us to hold both truths at once. In the early morning hours of January 6, 2015, officers with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department responded to an apartment on Canterwood Drive in North Charlotte at 4:20 in the morning. They had received a call about an unresponsive infant. When they arrived, they found a baby boy, just 26 days old, who was not breathing. His name was Luis Miguel Jr. He had been born on December 11, 2014. He was less than a month into his life when that life was taken from him. Luis Miguel was rushed to Carolina's medical center, where medical personnel fought to save him. He did not survive. The investigation that followed moved quickly. Homicide detectives responded to both the hospital and the apartment on Canterwood Drive. In the course of their work, they spoke with 17-year-old Daniela Villarreal, the baby's mother. Daniela voluntarily went to police headquarters to speak with detectives. What she disclosed during that interview, combined with the medical findings regarding Luis Miguel's injuries, led investigators to a devastating conclusion. Daniela Villarreal was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and felony child abuse. The medical investigation determined that the infant had been physically harmed and that those injuries caused his passing. Police sources told local station WBTV that Villarreal had admitted that on occasions when the newborn cried, she had struck him. The sound of a newborn's cry, relentless, exhausting, impossible to ignore, had pushed a teenager who was already overwhelmed to a point of catastrophic failure. This was not a premeditated act. It was not the result of hatred. It was the result of a 17-year-old girl who was not equipped for the weight of motherhood, who had no proper support around her, and who made a choice in a moment of desperation that she could never take back. Luis Miguel paid the ultimate price. In the months that followed, Daniela Villarreal remained in the Mecklenburg County Jail. She was charged as a juvenile in some proceedings given her age and the circumstances. On January 7, 2016, almost exactly 1 year after Luis Miguel's passing, Daniela Villarreal appeared in court and entered a guilty plea. The original first-degree murder charge was dismissed as part of a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to felony child abuse, intentional child abuse inflicting serious injury. The decision to offer a reduced plea was not made lightly. Attorneys who worked the case took into account the girl's young age at the time of the events. She had been 16 when she became pregnant and 17 when Luis Miguel was born and passed away. She was, in the eyes of the law and many who observed the proceedings, both perpetrator and a product of a system that had failed her long before that morning on Canterwood Drive. Dr. Pat Krikorian, the clinical director of Florence Crittenton Services, a maternity program offering support and parenting resources for pregnant teenagers and young mothers in Charlotte, spoke openly to reporters after the plea. Her words are among the most important in this entire case. If she had the help that she needed at 16 or 13, or when she went home with the baby, Dr. Krikorian said, if she had some supportive services or adults in place, maybe this could have been avoided. This is not a statement that reduces Daniela Villarreal's responsibility. She pled guilty. She was sentenced. She is accountable for what happened to Luis Miguel. But Dr. Krikorian's words point to something the criminal justice system alone cannot fix. They point to the spaces in our communities where young people fall through the cracks, where teenage mothers go home from the hospital with a newborn and no instruction manual, no support network, no one checking in, no one asking if they are okay. And in those spaces, when crisis hits, the consequences can be irreversible. Luis Miguel Jr. lived for 26 days. 26 days. He had a name. He had a father. He had a family that remembered him. Neighbors at the Maple Run complex in North Charlotte where the family lived recalled Daniela posting photos of her pregnancy on social media, photos that showed excitement about the coming baby. Whatever went wrong in those 26 days happened in a space where no one was watching, where no one was helping, and where a crisis arrived faster than any child or system could catch it. The apartment on Canterwood Drive where Luis Miguel spent his brief life still stands. The quiet of the complex gives no indication of what happened there on that January morning. But for the family of Luis Miguel Jr., for the investigators who responded that morning, and for the community advocates who have spent years since that case calling for better resources for young parents in Charlotte, that address is unforgettable. Florence Crittenton Services and organizations like it exist for exactly this reason. They exist to stand in the gap between a young parent's desperation and a tragedy that cannot be undone. If you know a young parent who is struggling, if you are a young parent who is struggling, please reach out. Resources exist. Help is available. No parent should face the earliest days of a baby's life completely alone. Justice was served in this case. A guilty plea was entered. A sentence was handed down. But justice, in cases like this one, always feels incomplete. Because the life at the center of it, the life that was lost, cannot be restored by any courtroom in the world. Please like this video if this story reminds you why community matters. Drop a comment. These cases deserve to be remembered, and your support makes sure they are. Case 4, Megan Stack-Sadison. July 12, 2024. Catawba County, North Carolina. At 4:54 in the morning on July 12, 2024, deputies with the Catawba County Sheriff's Office in North Carolina received a report of a suspicious person near Section House Road in Hickory. When they arrived in the area, they found something that immediately concerned them. An adult woman, walking alone in the pre-dawn darkness, appearing, as the official press release described, disoriented. The deputies approached the woman carefully. She was barefoot. She appeared confused, unaware of her surroundings in a way that went beyond ordinary distress. The deputies began asking questions. And then the woman began walking away from them, moving down the road. The deputies followed her, matching her pace, asking her to stop. She did not stop. She walked 7/10 of a mile, through the dark and quiet streets, the deputies trailing behind her, until she arrived at a residence on Tanglewood Drive. At the door of that residence, with the deputies standing behind her, the woman turned, and she said something that investigators who have spent years in law enforcement still describe as among the most chilling statements they have ever heard. "Everyone come in," she said. "The baby is dead." One of the deputies, uncertain, asked what she meant. The woman responded again, calmly. "The baby looks dead." The deputies entered the home. Inside, they found 9-month-old Samantha Sadison. The infant was deceased. The woman who had led them there was 39-year-old Megan Sadison, Samantha's mother. What unfolded in the hours that followed would become one of the most troubling and widely reported cases of its kind in North Carolina in recent memory. It attracted national coverage from People magazine, Law and Crime, WSOC-TV, and dozens of other media outlets. And at the center of it was a question that haunts this case even now. How did a child lose her life while in the care of a mother who had already shown signs of crisis? And why did no one intervene in time to prevent it? Megan Sadison was taken by ambulance to Catawba Valley Medical Center for evaluation following the discovery of Samantha's passing. In the course of the investigation, investigators reviewed an affidavit of probable cause that contained statements attributed to Sadison herself. According to that document, she stated that what she had done to Samantha was a mercy killing. She stated that she had done it because, in her words, God had told her to. The autopsy results determining the official cause of Samantha's passing were pending at the time of Sadison's initial court appearances. What the documents did confirm was that Samantha Sadison, 9 months old and entirely dependent on her mother, did not survive that night. What investigators also uncovered, and what makes this case even more deeply unsettling, is that this was not the first time Megan Sadison had allegedly attempted to harm her infant daughter. Court documents and search warrant applications reviewed by WSOC-TV and other local outlets reported that in December of 2023, 7 months before Samantha's passing, Sadison had allegedly added crushed prescription antipsychotic medication to Samantha's bottle. According to the affidavit, Sadison stated at the time that God had told her to do this as well. That incident, investigators reported, was not brought to the attention of authorities or medical professionals. Samantha received no medical intervention following that incident in December. She was, by all indications, left in her mother's care while her mother's mental state continued to deteriorate. And then, in July of 2024, Samantha Sadison was gone. For those who have followed this case closely, the deeper question is not simply about Megan Sadison and the choices she made. The deeper question is about the systems that surrounded this family. Because this was not Megan Sadison's first encounter with a mental health crisis that spilled into a situation involving a child's safety. In December of 2017, Megan Stack, as she was known at the time before her marriage, had made national headlines in the Charlotte area when she picked up her then 8-year-old daughter Ava from her elementary school in Mint Hill, a suburb of Charlotte, and disappeared. Law enforcement issued public alerts expressing serious concern for the safety of both mother and daughter. Authorities at the time noted that Sadison had exhibited behavioral issues in the past. The woman and her daughter were missing for 2 full days before Megan arrived at an emergency medical services substation near St. Louis, Missouri. Mother and daughter were found safe. Megan was evaluated at a mental health facility. Her daughter Ava was returned to her father. The father, Timothy Liebarger, told media at the time that Megan appeared to have been experiencing a mental health crisis, and that she had told him people were after her. 7 years passed between that 2017 incident and the night of July 12, 2024. 7 years in which Megan Sadison had another child, an infant named Samantha. 7 years in which, at some point, the same patterns of crisis appear to have returned, this time with consequences that could not be walked back. Megan Sadison was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder on July 19, 2024, 1 week after the events on Tanglewood Drive. She was held in the Catawba County Detention Facility without bond. Her first court appearance was scheduled for July 22. The Catawba County District Attorney indicated they would be seeking a first-degree murder indictment. Search warrants were executed for all of Sadison's medical records, writings, and phone records. The investigation was described as thorough and ongoing. The neighbors who had seen Megan Sadison in the weeks before the tragedy spoke to reporters with a particular kind of heartbreak. One neighbor, named Brent Hefner, told WSOC-TV that he had recently seen the mother pulling baby Samantha in a wagon down the street. From the outside, he said, they looked like a happy family. That image, a mother and her infant daughter in a wagon, the warm air of a North Carolina summer around them, is the image that those who follow this case carry. Because that was Samantha, a baby in a wagon, a 9-month-old girl at the very beginning of her life, who deserved every single thing that life had to offer. This case is not simply a story about a crime. It is a story about the intersection of untreated mental health, inadequate intervention systems, and the catastrophic consequences that fall on the most vulnerable when that intersection is ignored. It raises urgent questions about what resources exist for parents in crisis, and what tools communities and courts have to intervene before the unthinkable happens. Samantha Sadison deserved to be protected. She deserved a future. The justice system will now determine what accountability looks like for the woman who was responsible for keeping her safe. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact the National Crisis Helpline by dialing or texting 988. Help is available around the clock. If this case left you with questions, with thoughts, with a need to speak, please drop them in the comments below. Case 5, Malika Diane Bennett. May 2021, with events beginning in August 2020. North Charlotte, North Carolina. There is a particular kind of cruelty in concealment. Not just the act itself, the act that causes harm, but the deliberate, calculated work of hiding what has been done, of going through the motions of ordinary life while a secret of the most devastating kind sits buried, literally and figuratively, just out of reach of the world. This is the story of 4-year-old Miguelic Young, a little girl her family called Jelly. And it is the story of how a mother's cruelty and a family's silence kept her hidden from justice for months, and kept her memory from being honored until investigators refused to stop asking questions. Jelly was known, by everyone who loved her, as a child full of personality. Her Aunt Sabrina Baker described her as someone who always had to have her lip gloss. Her lip gloss, the family said, had to be popping at all times, and if it wasn't, Jelly would go find it herself. She loved getting her hair done. She loved looking pretty. She loved her family, her cousins, and her daddy. She was, by every account, a bright and vivid little person who brought energy and laughter into the lives of everyone around her. Jelly was last seen alive by people outside her home in late August of 2020. She was 4 years old. In May of 2021, the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department received tips and began investigating reports that a 4-year-old girl had not been seen in several months. Investigators began following leads. They spoke to individuals connected to the family. What they pieced together from those interviews was a timeline that was, in the words of CMPD Lieutenant Brian Crum at the time of the arrest, deeply disturbing. According to search warrant documents released after the investigation, an older sibling of Jelly, who was 13 years old at the time, provided investigators with a detailed account of what had happened in the final days of her little sister's life. The account began with an incident involving Jelly having a bathroom accident, something completely normal for a young child. According to the siblings' account, Malika Bennett, Jelly's mother, responded to this by forcing the 4-year-old to stand in the laundry room of the home as punishment. What followed was not a timeout. It was not a brief moment of discipline that passed and was forgotten. Jelly was forced to stand in that laundry room for 3 consecutive days. She was not allowed to sit. She was not allowed to leave. For 3 days, a 4-year-old child stood. Children's bodies are not designed to withstand that kind of prolonged physical stress. Jelly, already small for her age, weakened. And then, after 3 days, she collapsed. She fell through the back door of the home and struck her head on the ground outside. Malika Bennett, according to investigators, attempted CPR. It was too late. Jelly was gone. What happened next reveals the depth of the cruelty at the heart of this case. Rather than calling emergency services, rather than reaching out to anyone for help, Bennett reportedly placed Jelly's body into 2 plastic garbage bags. Those bags were placed in the back of an SUV. For 5 days, Jelly's remains were in that vehicle. After 5 days, Malika Bennett allegedly forced her older daughter, the same 13-year-old who would later describe all of this to investigators, to help dig a hole in the backyard of the home on Braden Drive in North Charlotte. And there, in that backyard, Jelly was buried. Months passed. Jelly's father was told she was with other relatives. The world moved on. A Child Protective Services worker who had been assigned to visit the family noted that she had not seen Jelly since August of 2020 and raised a flag. That flag became the thread that investigators began to pull. On a Friday in May of 2021, detectives made the grim discovery in the backyard of the Braden Drive home. The remains of 4-year-old Mecklenburg Jelly Young were found in a shallow grave. Medical examiners later determined that she had been malnourished, that substances including acetone and ethanol were present in her system, and that the cause of her passing could not be definitively determined given the condition of the remains. But the manner of what had happened to her was clear. Malika Diane Bennett was arrested in May of 2021. She was charged with first-degree murder, felony child abuse, inflicting physical injury, and felony concealing a passing. She appeared in court and stood emotionless as the charges were read. Family members who packed the courthouse chanted outside. Jelly's aunt, Shamika Wade, said, "This innocent child." Bennett's mother, Tammy Moffitt, was also subsequently charged with concealing a passing and accessory after the fact to murder in connection with the case, suggesting that the concealment of what had happened to Jelly may have extended beyond just the woman directly responsible. The case moved through the courts over the following 2 years. Bennett reportedly told another person, prior to her arrest, that her daughter had passed away, demonstrating an awareness of what had happened and a deliberate decision to hide it rather than seek accountability. On July 13, 2023, Malika Diane Bennett appeared in Mecklenburg County Court and entered a guilty plea. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Under the terms of the plea agreement, the charges of child abuse inflicting serious injury and concealing a passing were dropped. A judge sentenced her to 25 to 31 years in prison, with the more than 2 years she had already served counting toward that total. She was also ordered to undergo psychiatric counseling while incarcerated. The reaction from Jelly's family in that courtroom was immediate and raw. Her aunt Shamika Wade said what many felt. She deserved 100 years, or life without parole. The day she gets out, you need to be old and gray, or in the grave yourself. Another family member, speaking about Bennett's relatively young age at sentencing, noted that 50 was the new 20 or 30, that Bennett would still have decades of her life ahead of her when she walked free, decades that Jelly would never have. Jelly's father spoke in court as well. His words were those of a man whose child had been taken, whose world had been permanently altered, and who deserved more from a justice system than a plea deal could ever truly provide. The case of Mecklenburg Jelly Young is documented in court records, investigative warrants, WBTV, WCNC, WCV, Queen City News, and Law and Crime. Every detail in this account is sourced from verified reporting. Every word about this little girl is rooted in the record of who she was and what happened to her. She loved her lip gloss. She loved looking pretty. She was 4 years old. Malika Diane Bennett is now serving her sentence in a North Carolina correctional facility. Justice came for Jelly, but for her family, for her father, her cousins, her aunts, the people who loved her, the wound that was left behind will never fully close. What can be said, with certainty, is that Jelly's memory was not allowed to disappear with her. The people who loved her made sure of that. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments. We are here to make sure these children are never forgotten. Case 6. Susan Robinson, Tanya McKnight, and Tryn McKnight. December 16, 2025. East Charlotte, North Carolina. There are cases that are hard to hear. And then there are cases that are almost impossible to comprehend. Cases where the sheer scale of what was done to a child, and for how long it was done, and by how many people who were supposed to be protecting her, forces you to stop and ask a question that has no clean answer. How did no one stop this? This is the story of 6-year-old Dominique Moody, and it is one of the most devastating child welfare cases in the history of the Charlotte area. Dominique was born on January 20th, 2019. From her earliest years, her life was shaped by instability. Her biological mother struggled with drug addiction and personal instability, and in 2021, when Dominique was just 2 years old, a court made the decision to grant sole legal and physical custody of the little girl to her aunt, Tanya McKnight. It was meant to be a protective decision. It was meant to place Dominique in a more stable environment, with family who could provide what her mother could not. Court records at the time of that custody transfer contained no indication of the conditions that would later be documented inside Tanya McKnight's home. Those conditions, when they were finally revealed to the world, were among the worst investigators had ever documented. On the morning of December 16, 2025, officers with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department were called to a home on Gwynn Hill Road in East Charlotte. The caller reported that a child was not breathing. Officers arrived at approximately 7:40 in the morning. Inside the home, they found 6-year-old Dominique Moody unresponsive. Dominique was transported by medic to a local hospital. She was pronounced deceased at 9:29 that same morning. She was 6 years old. She weighed 27 pounds. 27 pounds. To put that in context, a healthy 6-year-old girl typically weighs between 38 and 50 pounds. Dominique weighed less than a healthy 3-year-old. She had been starved. But starvation was only one element of what Dominique had endured. The investigation that followed, and the court documents, arrest warrants, and affidavits that became available to the public in the weeks after, painted a picture of sustained, systematic abuse that is almost incomprehensible in its scope and duration. According to investigators, Dominique had been forced to live inside a dog crate in the living room of the Gwynn Hill Road home. She was locked inside that crate routinely for extended periods of time. When Dominique eventually broke the crate, she was moved to the bathroom floor, which investigators described as covered in feces. She was bound with black duct tape. Her younger sister, who had turned 6 herself and was interviewed by investigators, described watching the 3 women, Tanya McKnight, Susan Robinson, and Terry Ann McKnight, tie Dominique up with black tape regularly. She described watching Dominique being restrained. She described Dominique's body becoming swollen. Photographs recovered from Susan Robinson's phone during the investigation showed Dominique duct-taped and wrapped in plastic. Those images were referenced in court proceedings as evidence of what Dominique had endured. The home itself, as documented in court filings reviewed by WCNC Charlotte, Law and Crime, and People magazine, was described as one of the most disturbing scenes investigators had encountered. Court records stated the residence was unkempt, contains human and animal feces in each room of the residence, has no centralized heating source, and is infested with rats and cockroaches, which bite and cause harm. For other children between the ages of 1 and 5 were also living in this home at the time of Dominique's passing. Those children, Dominique's siblings, and the other young ones in that household, were removed by Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services in the immediate aftermath. Susan Robinson, 61 years old, was the first to be arrested on December 20, 2025. She was charged with felony child abuse. Tanya McKnight, 51 years old, was arrested the following Monday and given a $2 million bond. Terry Ann McKnight, 22 years old, was arrested on Christmas Eve, December 24, 2025, and charged with the same suite of offenses. A judge noted at the time that Terry Ann McKnight appeared in a wheelchair at her initial hearing due to reported health issues from an unrelated incident. Prosecutors, who had initially charged all 3 women with felony child abuse offenses, indicated almost immediately that they were considering additional and more serious charges pending lab results. Those results came, and on February 4, 2026, all 3 women were formally charged with first-degree murder. They appeared in Mecklenburg County Superior Court on February 5, 2026. According to WCNC Charlotte's reporting of those proceedings, prosecutors detailed the allegations against the 3 women before a judge and a room full of observers. The 3 women appeared stone-faced. Capital defense attorneys were appointed to each defendant. All 3 were denied bond. Text messages recovered from the investigation revealed that after Dominique's passing, Robinson and Tanya McKnight had exchanged messages acknowledging they were in trouble and that they needed to clean the house. That evidence, according to prosecutors, demonstrated consciousness of guilt, an awareness by the defendants of the wrongfulness of what had been done and the significance of what investigators would find. Attorney Mark Jetton, speaking to WCNC Charlotte about the case, explained the legal framework that allowed all 3 women to be charged with first-degree murder, North Carolina's felony murder rule. The 3 of them are all acting in concert of some sort, Jetton explained, committing a felony together, and a person dies, so you all get charged. What makes this case particularly devastating, beyond even the details of what Dominique endured, is what investigators discovered about the history of contact between authorities and that Gwynn Hill Road address. According to WBTV's reporting, Police records show that officers had been called to that residence nearly 50 times before Dominique's passing. Nearly 50 times. And still, a 6-year-old child in that home spent the final year and a half of her life in conditions that investigators described as unimaginable. North Carolina lawmakers launched a formal investigation in the aftermath. Letters were sent to both CMPD and Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services requesting records, communications, and body camera footage involving Dominique and the 3 defendants for the period between January 20, 2019 and December 17, 2025. Nationally renowned civil rights attorney Ben Crump joined Dominique's family in Charlotte in calling for full accountability, not just from the 3 women charged with her passing, but from the systems that were supposed to protect her and failed. Representative Alan Chesser visited Mecklenburg County DSS to review processes and procedures. The county's response was described by lawmakers as inadequate. The conversation about systemic accountability in this case was still ongoing at the time of this documentary's research. Dominique Moody deserved to grow up. She deserved to go to school, to laugh, to eat, to run, to play, to be safe in her own home. She was 6 years old. She was a child. And the people who were chosen by a court of law to protect her chose, instead, to cause her harm for a year and a half before she lost her life. The case of Dominique Moody is now in the hands of the justice system. The 3 women charged in her passing, Susan Robinson, Tanya McKnight, and Terry Ann McKnight, await trial on first-degree murder charges. As this documentary is published, those proceedings are ongoing. What is not ongoing is Dominique's life. That was taken from her on Gwynn Hill Road, in the early morning hours of December 16, 2025, in a home that was supposed to be her safe place. Her name was Dominique Moody. She was 6 years old, and she deserved so much better. Please like this video, leave a comment. Cases like Dominique's are why this channel exists, because these children deserve to be seen, to be named, and to be remembered. Case 7, Sarah Weber. January 4, 2025. Charlotte, North Carolina. There is a category of child welfare case that is, in some ways, harder to understand than violence. Not harder to condemn. The condemnation is immediate and unambiguous. But harder to understand in the way that all profound neglect is hard to understand, because it asks a question that has no simple answer. How does a parent look at their own child, day after day, and choose not to act? This is the case of Sarah Weber. And at the center of it is a 4-year-old girl who spent approximately 6 months without eating solid food, 6 months suffering in silence, losing weight, becoming increasingly ill, while her mother, who was present in that home every day, did not once take her to a doctor. Sarah Weber was 28 years old. She was a mother living in a rented home on Delamere Lane in Charlotte, North Carolina. By all outward appearances, she was an ordinary person living in an ordinary neighborhood. Her neighbor, Jacqueline Wade, later told WSC-TV that she had no idea anything was wrong, that you could be in close proximity to someone, she said, and not know the extent of the suffering happening just beyond the wall. In the early morning hours of Saturday, January 4, 2025, officers with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department arrived at the home on Delamere Lane. The exact nature of the call that brought them there was not specified in public documents. But when they spoke to Sarah Weber, what she told them was alarming in its frankness. She told officers, openly, that one of her children had not eaten solid foods in approximately 6 months. She told them that the same child had been experiencing diarrhea for at least 1 month. And she told them that in all of that time, 6 months without solid food, 1 month of constant illness, she had not taken the child to a doctor. Not once. The child was her 4-year-old daughter. When that child was finally taken to a medical professional following Weber's arrest, the doctor's finding was immediate and unambiguous. The girl was severely malnourished. The severity of the malnutrition was such that the child was admitted to the hospital for further evaluation and treatment. Sarah Weber was arrested at her home on Delamere Lane and transported to the Mecklenburg County Jail. She was charged with 1 felony count of neglect of a child causing serious physical injuries, the charge that North Carolina law designates for cases where a caregiver's failure to act results in serious harm to a child in their care. Weber was booked under a $25,000 bond. Her first court appearance was set for Monday, January 6, 2025. Neighbor Jacqueline Wade, speaking to reporters outside the home, expressed the reaction that much of the community shared. "It's definitely very saddening," she said. "So you could be in close proximity to someone and not know the extent of suffering." That phrase, "the extent of suffering," is the one that stays with anyone who examines the details of this case. Because the suffering was not hidden in the way that violence is sometimes hidden. There were no bruises to conceal beneath clothing. There was no injury that could be attributed to an accident. This was malnutrition. This was a child visibly, measurably wasting away. This was a child who had diarrhea for a month, an ongoing, persistent physical symptom that any parent, in any ordinary circumstance, would recognize as a sign that something was deeply wrong. And yet, for 6 months, the threshold for seeking help was never reached. The owner of the home on Delamere Lane confirmed to WSOC-TV that Weber was the mother of the affected 4-year-old. The investigation was handled by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, with Mecklenburg County Social Services involved in the welfare of the child following Weber's arrest. The outcome for the child, whether she fully recovered from the malnutrition, whether she experienced any lasting effects from those 6 months of deprivation, was not publicly disclosed in available records at the time of this documentary's research, consistent with standard protections for the privacy of child victims. What was confirmed is that she survived, and that she received medical care. Sarah Weber's case is, at its core, a story about the duty of care that every parent holds. Not a complicated, expensive, or extraordinary duty. Simply the basic obligation to feed your child, to notice when they are unwell, and to seek help when something is wrong. It is a story about what happens when that most fundamental duty is abandoned. The charge of felony child neglect causing serious physical injury is not a minor charge. It carries significant sentencing exposure under North Carolina law. The details of Weber's case as it moved through the court system were not fully publicly available at the time of this research, but the arrest, the charge, and the verified facts of the child's condition are documented across multiple credible sources, including WBTV, WSCV, Queen City News, People Magazine, Law and Crime, and the Mirror US. Weber's 4-year-old daughter deserved to eat. She deserved to be taken to a doctor when she was sick. She deserved the most basic elements of parental care. What she received instead, 6 months of deprivation and 1 month of untreated illness, left her in a hospital bed, fighting to recover from harm that should never have been allowed to happen. There is no justification for what happened on Delamere Lane, but there is a lesson in it. A lesson about watching out for the children in our communities, about being the neighbor or the family member or the friend who asks the uncomfortable question when something seems wrong. Because Jacqueline Wade was right. The extent of suffering that can exist in the house next door, invisible and unspoken, is something none of us should accept as normal. If you know of a child who may be experiencing neglect, please contact your local child protective services or call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Please like this video. Every case on this channel is told because every victim deserves to be seen and every community deserves to be informed. Case 8. Hallie Ingram. July 7, 2025. Charlotte, North Carolina. The fentanyl crisis in the United States is not a statistic. It is a rolling human tragedy that touches families, neighborhoods, and communities in ways that continue to evolve and expand in scope, even years after the epidemic became a national emergency. Most discussions of fentanyl's consequences focus, rightly, on the adults it claims. But there is a dimension of this crisis that receives far less attention. The children who become its victims not by any choice of their own, but simply by proximity to the adults whose lives have been consumed by it. This is the story of 9-month-old Cheyenne Ingram. And it is the story of how the presence of a lethal substance in an apartment on Orchard Trace Lane in Charlotte ended the life of a baby who had barely begun to discover the world. On the morning of Monday, July 7, 2025, officers with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department responded to an apartment in the 300 block of Orchard Trace Lane in the North Tryon Division of Charlotte. The call was to assist medic. When officers arrived, they found an infant, 9 months old, who was unresponsive. Her name was Cheyenne. Medic transported Cheyenne to Novant Health Presbyterian Medical Center. Cheyenne did not survive. She was pronounced deceased at the hospital. Homicide detectives responded to both the hospital and the apartment on Orchard Trace Lane. As part of the initial investigation, they spoke with Cheyenne's mother, 35-year-old Hallie Ingram. According to an affidavit later reviewed by WSOC-TV and WCNC Charlotte, Ingram told detectives what she said had happened that morning. She described giving Cheyenne a bottle at approximately 9 in the morning and placing her in a pack-and-play. She said the baby was acting normally at that point. She said she then laid down for approximately 1 hour. When she woke up, she said, she found Cheyenne unresponsive. The investigation continued. Detectives waited for the results of a comprehensive examination by the North Carolina Medical Examiner's Office. On Monday, August 11, 2025, those results arrived. The cause of Cheyenne's passing was confirmed: fentanyl toxicity. This was not an overdose in the traditional sense, a person making a conscious decision to use a substance. Cheyenne was 9 months old. She had no capacity to make decisions. She was entirely dependent on the adults in her environment to keep that environment safe. What she encountered in that apartment on Orchard Trace Lane was a substance so potent that its presence in her tiny body caused her system to fail. According to WCNC Charlotte's reporting of the arrest warrant, Ingram was charged with knowing exposure, meaning investigators concluded that Cheyenne had been exposed to fentanyl by a grossly negligent omission in care. In other words, the charge was not that Ingram deliberately administered the substance to her daughter, but that the conditions of negligence in that home allowed a 9-month-old to come into contact with it. Investigators also noted in the affidavit that Hallie Ingram had a prior documented history involving trafficking of opium and drug possession charges. This history was cited as context for the investigation. On Monday, September 1, 2025, homicide detectives signed arrest warrants for Hallie Ingram. On Tuesday, September 2nd, CMPD's Violent Criminal Apprehension Team, the unit known as VCAT, located and arrested Ingram. She was transferred to the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office and charged with murder and felony child abuse. Her bond was set at $600,000. Her first court appearance was held on Wednesday, September 3, 2025. The CMPD press release confirming the arrest was published on September 3, 2025, and is available on the official Charlotte City government website, confirming all details of the case and the investigation timeline. At the time of Cheyenne's passing, another child was present in the apartment. The existence of that second child, and the conditions in which both children were living, underscores the broader tragedy of this case and the ongoing danger posed by drug environments to young children who have no ability to protect themselves. Investigators were asked how they believed Cheyenne ingested the fentanyl. Police stated publicly that they did not yet know exactly how the contact occurred, whether it was through a surface, a residue, contaminated materials, or some other means of exposure. What was not in question, based on the toxicology report, was that fentanyl was present in the infant's system at the time of her passing and that it was the cause of her passing. The fentanyl crisis has given rise to a generation of children who are being raised in proximity to one of the most lethal substances ever to enter American communities. Cheyenne Ingram's case is not the first of its kind in Charlotte, and it is not the first in North Carolina. Across the state and across the country, medical examiners and investigators have documented a growing number of cases in which infants and young children have been exposed to fentanyl and other synthetic opioids through the environments in which they were being raised. Each of those cases, like Cheyenne's, begins not with a child making a choice, because children cannot make those choices, but with an adult whose relationship with a substance has eroded their ability to provide the basic safety that a child requires. Cheyenne Ingram lived for 9 months. She learned to be held. She knew the warmth of being fed and the comfort of being placed in her pack-and-play. She was, by every measure, a baby at the very beginning of learning what this world was. She did not get to finish that lesson. Hallie Ingram faces murder and felony child abuse charges. Her case was ongoing at the time of this documentary's research. The accountability that Cheyenne Ingram's name demands is one that extends beyond the courtroom. It demands a community conversation about fentanyl, about children, about the obligation we carry toward the youngest and most vulnerable among us. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance dependency and has children in the home, please reach out to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Helpline at 1-800-662-4357. The call is free, confidential, and available every hour of every day. Cheyenne deserve to live. Please like, comment. Case 9, Demetria Robinson. June 15, 2023. North Charlotte, North Carolina. The 5th block of Sunwalk Court in North Charlotte is a quiet residential street. The kind of street where families have lived for decades, where neighbors know each other's routines, where people walk in the evenings and children play in yards on summer afternoons. Neighbor Thaddeus Johnson had lived on that street since 1995. In nearly 30 years, he told WCNC Charlotte, nothing like what happened on the night of June 15, 2023 had ever touched that block. This is a good neighborhood, Johnson said. This is the first time anything like this has happened. It just shocked me. The call came in at approximately 11:30 at night. Officers with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department responded to a report of an assault with a deadly weapon at a residence in the 5600 block of Sunwalk Court. When they arrived, what they found was not a dispute between adults. It was not the kind of situation their training had prepared them to categorize easily. They found a 12-year-old boy who had sustained what CMPD described in its official communications as significant trauma, injuries to his body that were severe in their nature. His name was Ahmad Wrighton. He was born on October 11, 2010. He was 12 years old. Ahmad was rushed by medic to Atrium Health Main in Charlotte. The medical team received him and worked to address his injuries. Ahmad Wrighton did not survive. He was pronounced deceased at the hospital. The community reaction to his passing was one of profound shock and grief. Ahmad's great-grandfather, Michael Wrighton, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse in the days that followed. He was a typical 11-year-old, 12-year-old student who enjoyed life and the things that he did as a child, he said. His voice carried the particular devastation of a man who had lived long enough to see much, but had never imagined seeing this. Ahmad had not been a Charlotte resident. He was from Charleston, South Carolina. He had come to Charlotte specifically for a graduation, a joyful occasion, a celebration of a milestone in his family's life. According to family statements reported by WSOC-TV and WCNC Charlotte, Ahmad was staying at the Sunwalk Court home during that visit. The home belonged to Anthony Rashad Wigfall, who was the biological father of Ahmad's half-sister. Demetria Robinson, 32 years old, was identified as an associated family member inside the residence. Ahmad had come to Charlotte to celebrate. He never went home. In the hours that followed the discovery of Ahmad's injuries, CMPD's homicide unit worked through the night. Investigators spoke with witnesses, processed the scene, reviewed evidence, and pieced together a picture of what had occurred inside that home on the night of June 15th. CMPD Major Ryan Butler acknowledged to reporters early Friday morning that there was a lot of information that investigations can't verify just yet, and that the case was being described internally as incredibly complex, suggesting investigators believe the events may have involved multiple locations and required thorough documentation before a full picture could be established. The complexity did not slow the arrests. On Friday, June 16, 2023, the official press release from the City of Charlotte's CMPD Public Affairs Office, published on charlottenc.gov, confirmed the timeline precisely. Homicide detectives arrested Anthony Rashad Wigfall, date of birth May 4, 1989, and Demetria Robinson, date of birth February 7, 1991. Both were transported to the Law Enforcement Center in Uptown Charlotte, where they were interviewed by detectives. At the conclusion of those interviews, both were transferred to the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office and charged with murder. This was the 6th homicide in Charlotte in the month of June, 2023 alone. That statistic, offered in the same press release that named Ahmad Wrighton as a victim, is a quiet, awful piece of context. Both Wigfall and Robinson made their initial court appearances on Monday, June 19, 2023. The courtroom was described by reporters present as packed. Family members of Ahmad Wrighton sat in the gallery, watching the two people charged with his passing stand before a judge. Both Wigfall and Robinson were told they were facing charges of first-degree murder, the most serious charge available under North Carolina law, carrying the possibility of life in prison without parole or, in capital cases, the death penalty. Both were appointed public defenders. Neither was granted bond. Both would remain in the Mecklenburg County Jail pending their next court appearances, scheduled for a bond hearing on June 28th and a probable cause hearing on July 10th. Ahmed's great-aunt, Dorian Wrighton Miller, who was also his godmother, spoke outside the courthouse. Her words were not measured or careful. They were the words of a woman in the rawest possible grief. A woman watching the people accused of harming her nephew stand in a courtroom while her nephew was gone. "We raised our children together as siblings more than cousins," she said. "I pray that they both get the death penalty. There's no excuse. And then, it's just the fact that he killed my nephew in front of his sister." That detail, that Ahmed's sister, whose father was one of the accused, may have been present when her brother was harmed, is the detail that haunts this case most completely. Because Ahmad came to Charlotte to celebrate his sister's achievement. He came to be with family. He came in joy. And the last thing he may have seen, or the last thing she may have seen, was a nightmare that no 12-year-old should ever experience, and no sister should ever carry. A neighbor who spoke to reporters recalled seeing someone running from the home and attempting to escape up a hill before being apprehended and brought back inside. That account, cited in multiple news reports, added another layer to the picture investigators were building. The investigation was described as active and ongoing. CMPD's lead detective, Detective Jones, was assigned to the case. Investigators asked anyone with additional information to contact the Charlotte Crime Stoppers line at 704-334-1600. Ahmad Wrighton traveled to Charlotte from Charleston for a graduation. He deserved to travel home again. He deserved to grow up, to finish school, to become whoever he was going to become. He was 12 years old, and by every account of the people who loved him, his great-grandfather, his great-aunt, his godmother, his family who drove to Charlotte and packed a courtroom and wept in the aisles, he was a child full of life and worth. The justice system now carries the weight of this case. The charges are on record. The accused are in custody. And Ahmad Wrighton's name is on record, not just in a court docket, but in the memory of every person who heard his story and refused to let it pass without notice. For the family of Ahmad Wrighton, who came to Charlotte in celebration and left carrying grief that no family should carry, this documentary honors his memory with the seriousness and respect he deserves. If this case moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments. Ahmad Wrighton deserves to be remembered. Case 10, Bryant's Parks. December 26, 2025. West Charlotte, North Carolina. The Studios and Suites 4 Les Motel sits on Queen City Drive in West Charlotte. It is not a place that makes the news often. It is not a landmark. It is not a place that most residents of Charlotte would think of by name. But in the early hours of December 26, 2025, the day after Christmas, a day meant for family and warmth and the quiet settling of a holiday, it became the location of a tragedy that shook the Charlotte community and reverberated across the country. At approximately 1:20 in the morning, officers with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department responded to a call for help at the motel on Queen City Drive. When they entered a room inside the Studios and Suites 4 Les, they found a 1-year-old girl who was not breathing. Her name was Camila Michelina. She was 1 year old. Medic transported Camila to a nearby hospital immediately. The medical team that received her did everything they could. Camila Doris Michelina did not survive. She was pronounced deceased. Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department homicide detectives and crime scene investigators responded to the motel. The investigation began immediately. In the course of speaking with individuals connected to the scene, detectives made contact with a woman who identified herself as the child's mother, 26-year-old Bryant Parks. A guest at the motel who told investigators she was close to the child's family indicated that the nature of what happened might be connected to drug exposure. That initial indication became, as the investigation continued, the central finding of the case. Investigators uncovered evidence of the presence of crack cocaine and fentanyl at the scene. According to arrest warrant documents reviewed by WBTV, WSCTV, Law and Crime, and other outlets, Camila had been exposed to both substances, cocaine and fentanyl. And those substances, according to investigators, caused her passing. On December 26, 2025, the same day Camila was found, CMPD charged 26-year-old Bryant Parks with felony child abuse and exposing a child to a controlled substance. Parks was held at the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office under a bond of $1 million. She had her first court appearance that same day. In the days following the initial arrest, additional details emerged. An affidavit filed by investigators described an account from Parks herself. According to that affidavit, Parks told police that an acquaintance had come to the motel room and had smoked crack cocaine in the room for approximately 1 minute. She told investigators that 1-year-old Camila had been just a few feet away at the time. Parks reportedly maintained that it was the acquaintance, not herself, who was responsible for the drug use in the room that night. Investigators noted that the question of whether Parks herself was also using drugs at the time of Camila's exposure remained under active investigation. What the warrant made clear, regardless of the specific mechanics of the exposure, was that Camila had been exposed to both cocaine and fentanyl in the room where her mother was present and responsible for her safety. And that exposure had caused her to lose her life. Camila Michelina was 1 year old. She had just passed the 1-year mark. That first birthday that parents celebrate with small cakes and photographs, and the particular tenderness of watching a child who has survived their first year of life take another step forward. She had learned what it felt like to be held. She had learned faces. She had learned the feeling of being fed, of being put to sleep, of waking up. She was at the very beginning of becoming who she was going to be. She did not get to continue. The case of Breonce Parks and the passing of Camila Michelina is documented in detail across WBDV, WSCV, WBDV's investigative team, Law and Crime, The Mirror US, and a detailed account published on Medium by the True Crime with Kai platform. Every detail in this account is verified from those sources and consistent across reporting. Employees at the motel told reporters that surveillance footage from the property would be reviewed by police as part of the investigation. That footage, combined with the forensic evidence and the statements gathered from Parks and witnesses, formed the foundation of the case against her. The charge of exposing a child to a controlled substance in North Carolina is a serious felony. The charge of felony child abuse in circumstances that result in serious injury carries significant sentencing exposure. At the time of this documentary's research, Breonce Parks remained in custody, and the legal proceedings in her case were ongoing. The story of Camila Michelina arrives at the end of this documentary, our 10th case, but it is not a story that belongs at the end of a list. It belongs in the same conversation as every child who has been harmed by the drug crisis that is reshaping communities across America. It belongs in the conversation about what it means to be a parent in an environment where fentanyl and cocaine are present and accessible. It belongs in the conversation about what accountability looks like when a 1-year-old pays the ultimate price for an adult's failure of care. It also belongs in the conversation that this entire documentary has been building. The conversation about what kind of community Charlotte wants to be, and what that community is willing to do to protect its most vulnerable members. Because across these 10 cases, from Erica Parsons to Jade Williams, from Jelly Young to Little Dominique, from Cheyenne to Ahmad, and now to Camila, the through line is the same. Every single child in this documentary was entirely dependent on an adult to keep them safe. Every single child was failed by that adult in the most irreversible way possible. And every single case ultimately came to light because investigators, reporters, family members, neighbors, and community advocates refused to let these children be forgotten. That refusal is what justice looks like long before a verdict. It looks like asking questions. It looks like calling a hotline. It looks like subscribing to a channel that believes these names deserve to be spoken, that these lives deserve to be documented, and that the communities these children lived in deserve to reckon with what happened in their midst. Camila Michelina, 1-year-old, West Charlotte, North Carolina, December 26, 2025. We remember her. We remember all of them. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance dependency, please contact the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Helpline at 1-800-662-4357. Free, confidential, available every hour of every day. If you are concerned about the safety of a child in your community, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. These calls save lives. These conversations matter. These children mattered. Thank you for watching this documentary. If these 10 cases have moved you, educated you, or motivated you to think differently about the children in your community, please do 3 things right now. Like this video to help more people find it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts about these cases and the children at the center of them, so you never miss an episode. Hit that notification bell so you are always the first to know when a new documentary drops. We will continue telling these stories, because these children deserve to be more than a case number. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be named. And they deserve the world knowing what happened to them and why. We will see you in the next documentary.